When I was walking around, when I didn't need to eat or breathe or do anything, I was just a cosmic phantom of light, rainbow flying around, and somehow still had a body on the earth. People would, when they would encounter me, it would scare them. You know, my reality that somebody didn't need to breathe and have a heartbeat, and was just a walking drug zombie, so to speak. It was frightening to them, and I couldn't do any communicating with them. I was of no help, and people would try to throw me in jail, and they said I committed treason against the U.S. by causing the hippie revolution. How about that for a joke?
Welcome to Water People, a podcast about the aquatic experiences that shape who we become back on land. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. Here we get to talk story with some of the most interesting and adept waterfolk on the planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. Today, we're in conversation with the venerated elder John Peck. Dave, I was thinking to write something about John, but can you intro us?
Yeah, John Peck, one of the originals in the surfing timeline and modern surfing anyway. He was a very talented surfer in the 60s of his young, probably early 20s sort of age group of people who were filling the space that was left in Hawaii and California in lineups, so people had been surfing Sunset Beach, Paumalu, all those sort of incredible waves along the North Shore for a very long time before industrialism, colonialism came there. But in the next wave of surfers that came to those breaks, people like John Peck, Greg Knoll, Mickey Munoz, and plenty of locals too who were riding pipos deeper than a lot of those guys. That was a very interesting time because people like John were looking at Pipeline, for example, and there was no one out there, and they were trying to figure out, how do you ride a wave like that on these huge clunky longboards essentially that were made for like Malibu riding at Malibu and slopey little slow California waves. So he cracked the code one day at Pipeline. It was New Year's Day, and he tells the story, so I won't go over it here, but essentially the way he figured out how to slide down the face and successfully ride Pipeline on his backhand is still the way we all do it today, which is jamming your arm in the wall, grabbing the outside rail, and steering yourself along to make the wave. So John was that guy, and he was on the first posters and issues of Surfer magazine and became this celebrated guy.
It's probably rare that we trace like a particular wave riding adaptation back to a particular person. Like that.
True.
That probably hasn't happened a lot.
Yeah. So he, though, also was an extreme character. So around that time, there's a surf film that is out where he's captured on film surfing Honolulu Bay really well, but he's so cocky and like just full tilt that he's smoking a cigarette while he's doing that out in the lineup. And there's a film with that in it. So if someone can find that and tell each other where to find it, I would be interested. So that's interesting just to see that he was a pretty extreme character who then went on to dive deeply into psychedelics and into esoteric interests like yoga and meditation.
He was part of the great hippie boom in the U.S.
Yep.
Young people really questioning the way their parents had chosen to do life in sort of domestic, suburban, everything better through science kind of living. And people were going back to the land, or so the story goes, and also getting super experimental. And surfing was wrapped up in that.
Yeah, and John
cultural,
was really
romanticized,
wrapped up in that.
Yeah,
so his proximity in Southern California to the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which was a group out of Laguna who were basically running hash and acid around the world through surfboards and their surfing network and boats, because lots of surfers had boats and were traveling the Pacific, and John was really wrapped up in that whole movement, and he was probably one of those people that were right on that edge of it all where others would look and go, whoa, okay, Peck is really pushing things there with how much acid you could take, how much yoga you could do, how much meditation you could partake in, how much fasting and all of these things. He was such an extreme character who was willing to push all of those interests to their end point. So, like fasting every Saturday, taking acid every Sunday, going out at Sunset Beach, trying to figure out how to ride the wave or pipeline or all these other waves. So a very extreme character who then went down the dark sort of path of alcoholism and addiction for a while there, and then came out of it. And when he came out of it, he probably had a decade or two of being clean and sober and a complete yogi, and that's where I met him. So I met John probably early 2000s, and I was passing through Southern California with some friends. We were playing music and surfing, and we happened to stay at Garth Murphy and Uva, their house, the Derby House in Encinitas, which is like this living museum of art and music, and people like Hendrix and Morrison and Beatles, all these kind of radically incredible, influential artists had passed through that house. So we were staying there too. And John was the caretaker at the time. He was looking after the Derby House. We arrived and had perhaps a couple days there, and the next day happened to be a Tuesday. At that time in my life, I was a couple of years into fasting and being silent every Tuesday, every week. And when that day came along, I told John the day before that I was going to be fasting tomorrow and silent, and he was just stoked. He was like, right on, brother Dave. Great. He was really lit up by the fact that I was willing to do that so often. So the next day I'm silent. I think we went for a surf. We came back to the house, and then he and I started playing music, and he had this beautiful guitar tuning with this crazy resonant guitar that he would play. And I had some different instruments that were kind of droney and psychedelic. We sat down and silently played music in that house for about 8 hours. And the funny thing was, all of our friends who were with us would they sat down at the start, and after half an hour or so got itchy feet and left the house, got some lunch, came back. John and I are sitting there in this trance playing. Then they went surfing, came back. John and I were sitting there in this trance playing. And then the sun went down, everyone went and had dinner, came back, and there we were still seated together, hadn't spoken a word, and just were in this blissed out musical state. And for me, that experience was really special because here was someone who had so much history in the surfing timeline, who was also so interested in those subtle realms and those sort of more esoteric areas of life. And previously, in my experience, surfing and that world were very separated, but he was someone who embodied both. And I really appreciated that. And he really appreciated that in me, because I was 21, 22 years old. And the night ended, we stood up and smiled at each other, went to bed. The next morning I woke up so excited, I can't wait to ask John how that was for him, because that was just crazy for me. And the sun came up, we woke up and we spoke about it, and we just had a link forevermore after that. And so I would always seek him out when going through California or Hawaii even. And then I would learn of his impact on other people. And, he always did this thing where he was really into being of service. He wanted to be useful in the world. He wanted to use his awareness of his body through yoga and his spirit through meditation and music and everything. He wanted to use what he was experiencing as this kind of psychonaut, cosmonaut who was out on the furthest edges of being a human and reporting back to the rest of us here on Earth how to navigate life and those realms, those subtle realms. And so he would always offer his service of giving you kind of like a massage, relaxation, squeeze around your shoulders and your neck, and then
light up your Christmas tree.
Lighting up your Christmas tree. He would give you that opportunity to lay down and deeply relax, and he would help your spine out and help your neck, and then he would get his little rope thing and pull on your head, which was very scary.
Wrap it around. Was it the front? It's like the back of your neck. I remember laying down and being like, I don't really know this person, and I feel like I'm in a very vulnerable position right now. Yes. But it was...
yeah. He would give you traction, basically. Wild. It was gentle traction.
Yeah.
But he would say it would light up your Christmas tree, and often it would. Maybe a couple little pops of air would come out of knuckles in your spine or whatever, but you'd deeply relax. And that for him was the feeling of being useful for other humans. And I really loved that. And he was just unwavering at that point in his life with his focus on that. He wouldn't compromise.
Can you trace how John came to be in our local little community hall and where this recording came from, where the idea came from, and how we captured this audio.
Yeah.
Because it was before Water People existed.
Yep.
But it was part of seeds that were sown, I feel like, right at the very beginning of our relationship. Do you remember when you came to Florida and I feel like there was a sense that we knew we had work to do together around stories, and elders specifically. We were noticing what was happening in surf media, and it was kind of the same rehashing of the same stories, but we were traveling together and meeting all of these super wild, vibrant people living in really creative ways, and John Peck was one of them, of course. And I remember sitting on the deck of my mom's beach shack in Florida and thinking about how do we pull these stories together and share them with our community.
Yeah, where can they exist? And at the time it was such a youth-centric sort of reflection back to our surfing organism. You know, like if you were a magazine editor or a surf company, you're pretty much just focusing on 14 to 20, whatever it was. And I'd always quote, you know, that's the market and all that sort of jargon. But what it meant was that we just had a lack of depth in our storytelling, it felt like. And the one thing that would be told of yesteryear's heroes was always the same sort of stories, like you said. But here we were traveling and meeting these people who just had the most fascinating stories.
Yeah.
And so John was certainly one of those people. And I really felt like our community in the Northern Rivers region has a lot of people that are interested in those sort of esoteric or subtle realms of life, the sort of causal realm, not the effect realm. So like, how do you feel before you start to do things in your life? And so that takes this, you know, the shape of yoga classes and intentional communities. There's a lot of like intentional communities in the hills here where people are focusing on that. So I felt like there would be an audience, there'd be people here who would really appreciate some stories from John and perhaps even want to ride some of his boards. And so, you know, remember we were just talking about bringing him down here and having him stay on the farm. I have no idea.
It would have been
clock time, but a decade ago.
It would have been 2015.
Sure.
I'd say.
Sounds great.
Yeah, so 10 years ago.
Yeah, and he was super into it because he'd passed through here before, and he was just be like, yeah, whatever's useful and helpful in the world, brother Dave. And so we got him down here, and he was living on the farm here for a little while with us, and just through going surfing and being in our area and seeing how people responded to him, because, you know, like visually, he's just a sadhu. He's like a full yogi, long beard, stick thin but rubbery and flexible, constantly like sun gazing and staring up into the heavens, and just a presence, you know. And so I knew I could just see people's heads turning around here and like, who is that wizard with the Yeti? Who is that guy walking around with Dave? And so we came up with the idea of filling our little community hall down the road here with friends and interested people who would want to sit down and listen to some talk story with John. And at the time I was playing a bit of music with the Babe Rainbow fellas and Alioski and Cool Breeze and Angus, and we were really interested in sitting down, having John talk story, and then have a breather, and we would play some music to let those pretty wild stories sink in. And we'd play music for a couple of minutes, and then I would prod John with another question, and we'd get another story, and we would do that. And so we did that thinking, oh yeah, it'll be like, you know, 45 minutes to an hour perhaps that we'll do this, and people will be able to sit still and be interested. And the hall was completely filled. And the talk ended up going for 3 hours, and no one even stood up to go to the toilet. It was just like people were glued to their spot on the floor in the hall.
I remember
it was just captivating.
Cool Breeze playing the sitar.
Yep.
And that the resonant sound in the timber community hall was it was really captivating.
And like you said, this is before we had a bit more of an act. We didn't have proper recording gear or anything. And I think really the only audio recording of that is from Nathan Oldfield. Thankfully, Nathan was there taking pictures and recorded somehow. So the audio is what it is.
It is what it is. And it's only a snippet of the night because I think Nathan's camera died. And then we meant to release this many years ago, but it was lost in the ether of the internet for quite some time. I couldn't find the link when I went back after hearing of John's passing, but Nathan managed to find it. So we're stoked to be able to share a little moment of that night and John's really interesting words with you.
Yeah, yes, super fun. And it really makes me feel like I would urge people to find their version of John Peck in their world and sit down with them whenever you can and have a cuppa and listen to their stories. Let them be heard and seen as people who have walked the path longer than us and might have some things to share that are really valuable. And even if you felt compelled to, perhaps record them and share them with your community, because look at us now. John just left his body and it seemed like he'd prepared his whole life to die, much like Ram Dass said he'd been preparing his whole life for death. And so there's probably very little sadness around John leaving his body, probably more of a celebration than you'd think, actually. And he, would just be shedding his earth suit and in the next ride, the next wave that he's riding. And it just makes me grateful that we have this little snippet to share with people. And yeah, I really just recommend people do that in their own way, in their own communities, because it's really enriching and fulfilling, and it feels really good for us too.
And you never know when the opportunity might not be there any longer. Life is so rare, so precious. We've had a number of former Water People guests pass away in this last year. Jack McCoy, Lane Davey, and then John. And yeah, I'm so grateful to have shared moments getting to talk story and sit with them and have those stories recorded to be able to ripple on even after their bodies have left the planet.
Yeah.
It's precious.
Oh man, there are so many John Peck stories too right now in my head. I'm like, I want to tell the one about how he broke out of jail and disassembled the bricks of the building, and then he broke out again, but he stayed in his prison cell just to prove that he could escape anytime he wanted to. Or the time where he left the planet and he didn't come back for 5 days, and then he cracked the code on how to surf sunset. or the fact that anytime there was a good swell anywhere between Santa Cruz and Scorpion Bay in Mexico, John Peck would appear, and for decades everyone was like, oh my God, that guy's a wizard, the best day of the year, and there he is again, he just appears. It's just endless. It's endless, and it just makes me smile and laugh, and it makes me want to know about those kind of people in our timeline of surfing. Like, where are they? Who are they? I'm sure every region has a person like that, and make sure that their story is continued, because they're just fascinating. And he certainly prompted me to take an interest in all things in life, but especially where surfing fits into it. And he was a great proponent of, yes, be joyful, be a surfer, and be useful in your world. And that's in Cyrus's great short film when he says, heal yourself, heal your family, heal your country, heal the world, and don't forget to go surfing. And that's just beautiful.
I'm starting to try to create stuff on my own instead of letting it come through. Any of you musicians out here, you know what that happens. When you get in the way, it doesn't come through like when you're not out of the way. When you let yourself flow, it flows really well. I just hit a few wrong notes. I'll just listen to you guys play for a while. See? It's all harmonic.
Thanks for coming. Thanks, John, for coming across the other side of the Pacific.
Thanks, Dave, for inviting me. Possible to show up here. Yes, and all of you for being here present. In Hawaii, we call the family Ohana. And with Hana in Hawaii, where I call home, Hana means work. And how many people are 100% comfortable with the word work? A little bit of uncomfortability there where you work. Well, that's perfectly normally human. Somebody explained to me once what the word work meant, and I wondered, like, ohana, family, family's the most wonderful thing in the world, and you are our family here right now, completely. We're all we have, the presence here, fully. And somebody explained to me, I noticed you're uncomfortable with the word work. And I said, well, a little bit, And I said, well, let me explain to you what work really means. And she said, work, John, is letting God manifest love through you. If you're not letting God manifest love through you, you're not working. So get to work. And all of a sudden I felt really, different about it. Like, I thought it was like, she said, don't bother. If it isn't love, if it isn't God's love flowing through you, don't bother. You're not doing yourself or anybody else any good. So I learned to pay attention to what I call my higher power, which I call God. Do my best to let that energy flow through. And that's why I stopped playing when I found myself trying to play a few notes on my own. It sounds so pretty when I'm letting God flow through me. And when I try to do it on my own, something goes sour and strange. So it's really nice for me to be able to understand what is me for me and what is God working through me, because I'm a God junkie. I got to have God flowing through me 24/7 because I got to feel better, better, better. You relate with that? Anybody here need to feel better all the time? I think so. It's our nature. So I'm going to get off the stage here and pass it to some other people sharing here. Thank you for letting me share a little bit I've shared, and we'll share some more, I'm sure.
Yeah. So John and I met probably 10 years or so ago, I think, in Southern California, in the oldest house in the town of Encinitas, which is probably a few of us have been to Southern California. You know where that is.
Owned by the lady who told me that about work.
Yeah, exactly. Uva. And that's a real beacon of a spot. You've got Swamis, the site where Yogananda brought yoga from India, brought it to the West, brought it to California, right there where one of surfing's real cultural hubs exist, and who happened to be passing through and in those areas at the time were a lot of our culture's elders, our surfing elders. One of those is a local around here, Rusty Miller. Mm-hmm. A lot of us would know Rusty. And Rusty tells stories of surfing at Swamis and looking up and seeing perhaps Yogananda sitting on the hill there watching them surf. And that's a real powerful spot in surfing culture's timeline. And that's where John and I met. And I had heard of John before that through one of the millions of stories about John that circulate the surfing world of, pioneering pipeline in the 60s with the approach that is still being used to this day. In the 60s, John was there at the forefront of the movement to decode and surf pretty much the gnarliest waves in the world. Still to this day, pipe is the most feared by most of us and has taken many, many lives and delivered them elsewhere and delivered a lot of injuries and extreme moments. And that was right where John pioneered that style of taking off and riding pipeline somehow on enormous logs from yesteryear. And I feel like that's a really great start to tonight, which is really just, sharing stories, talking story, that kind of Hawaiian idea of talk story. Just creating the moment like cultures have for so many thousands of years, where we'd sit around the fire and listen to some of our elders share their stories and help us through their example. And I feel like those rides of John's at Pipeline are like real physical examples of the path that he has blazed. He's blazed many different paths in this life. And it's kind of one way to put it, eh, John?
Yeah, we all. Where's it at anyway? Anybody got a clue? Let me know, would you?
But could you share what was happening on the North Shore leading up to that moment of that was captured on film? I'm sure there's many things that were happening at that time, but in your experience, what was happening? How did it feel to be delivered to that point where you kind of got spat out onto the shoulder at Pipe and had successfully rode a wave there before anyone had done that
Actually, technically, there was a few crazy people that they used to body surf a rock a little south of there called Bonsai Rock. That a guy from La Jolla used to body surf it, and they called him Tiny Brain for obvious reasons. Okay. But nobody tried to surf it with a board because it was just too inside out, and the reef was too shallow and gnarly. And the year before, actually, the Butch Van Artsdalen and I got the privilege of riding pipeline in really good quality on a good west swell, New Year's Day, 1963. The year before, Phil Edwards and Dave Willingham and Mike Henson rode it smaller. Actually, we weren't the first guys to ride the pipeline. That's a misnomer. Somebody's, on a board. Phil Edwards actually paddled out there first on his own. But it was a little overhead. It wasn't double plus overhead. Pipeline becomes a whole nother critter when it starts getting up to double overhead and bigger. So nobody was crazy enough except Butch and I that morning, New Year's Day, until that point. And the only reason I think we did it is the night before was the heaviest drinking party on the North Shore. At Bud Brown's house, where Dewey Weber and you might know some of these names, famous surfers, Dewey Weber and Mike Henson and Mike Diffenderfer and Buddy Boy Keohe and a bunch of crazy North Shore surfers, and got together and we were drinking straight and black and white scotch drinking contests, and that was nuts. We overdosed completely, and he died, I died, and we were brought back to life somehow. And the next morning, he was already out surfing. Somebody pushed him out in the water. Bud Brown had his cameras, and the pipeline was breaking perfect. And they woke me up and said, "Hey, Butch is already surfing the pipeline." And Butch and I had surfed together a whole lot. Before that, he learned how to surf at Wind and Sea, which can be a really, really hollow, big island-style wave. And I pretty much learned how to surf high-quality performance stuff at Ala Moana. And Ala Moana Bowl, when it gets really big, is a lot like the pipeline. So we both had some experience with that kind of wave, and we just got lucky. I went over the falls and didn't kill myself on the first try on a big wave, and realized there's no way I can get into this wave unless I just do the side slide, under the lip side slide technique. Be right in the spot and let the wave start pitching and just get it pushing me down with its lip already thrown, sliding down into it. Or I'm just going to get thrown over the falls trying to drop in. So I got lucky and slid down into one, and they got it on film. And Bud Brown's dentist, a guy named Don James, caught it on still and made a poster out of it, and that poster just got really famous. And it was just a survival experience is what it was. And then a little bit after that, we started getting the hang of it, just where we were able to surf it. I just actually purled on that first good wave. I started to purl and side sliding down into it. The only way I could keep from falling out was grabbing the wave with my arm and holding the rail and pushing the rail in the wave, and they came to call that the pig dog maneuver. And that's what we learned at Ala Moana Bowl when it would be pitching. It was a survival technique, nothing good surfing about it. Keep from getting killed. And once I got into it, I just slid up by the nose and got barreled, and it was a little easier once I got spit out of the first one. It kind of started being kind to me. I caught the feel of it, and we actually sobered up in the water that morning, is what it was. I think, and I got 31 years without a drink nowadays, right now today, and that's important to me, for me, to have a clear consciousness, because I spent a lot of years chasing the feel good in a lot of places where it ended up feeling worse, and nowadays I'm a God junkie. God makes me feel better than all the best combinations did, and if they didn't, I would go back to something. I would try something else. So I'm going to pass it on for that one. It's kind of the in on that one. Just a brief thing. I'd actually like to surf a lot of other places. The North Shore was my home to me. It's from 1960 onward. I got to surf the North Shore by myself. I remember riding Sunset Beach and Laniakea, which is an incredible, incredible wave, and Haleiwa myself. There'd be nobody around even seeing me riding. Nobody's taking pictures much except Bud Brown once in a while. So there's a little view on my early days at the North Shore. Go ahead.
What was it like then when the influx happened? What were you do? What was your day-to-day?
It was a bummer. You know what that's like, people lived around here in Byron Bay when it was, still kind of the country more than it is now. But it's about it was a bummer until I got used to sharing with people, and they got more courteous. And there's a good evolution. It's family evolution, Today I'm really comfortable surfing in pretty crowded waves sometimes in California and Hawaii when it gets pretty good. Out at Honolulu it can get kind of crowded sometimes. And what was your question? I lose track, really.
Didn't really matter.
I'm just kind of overwhelmed. I'm a really a loner kind of guy, a lot. I don't spend a lot of time with a lot of people, and I'm not used to being so-called a point of attention where a bunch of people are looking at me to see what I'm going to do, I try to be invisible more than a point of focus, is what I spend most of my time doing, low profile. He asked me the other day, what does surfing mean to you? What's the essence of the most important thing about surfing to you? What does it really mean to you? And I thought about that for a while, and I went, there was, in the first Surfer magazine, there was a page, the last page in the first Surfer magazine that ever came out. John Severson put it out. He didn't even know if he was going to make any more or anything, and then it got annual, and then it got biannual, and then it got monthly, and that was the start of surf magazines. First one, the last page was a picture of a perfect wave in Santa Barbara with a single guy paddling out in offshore winds and flawless and really pristine looking, that pristine purity that we all have our own idea of. And the caption under it said, "This crowded world, the surfer can still seek and find the perfect day and the perfect wave and be alone with the surf and his thoughts." And that's kind of it right there. It's like when you get in the tube by yourself, it's like nothing else in the universe exists. You get reborn, and it's that solitude time with nature that's really important. And then you can carry that back to your family, and you can share that bliss and that love of that naturalness, that you got out in nature. And to me, it's worth sharing. The important thing is sharing what I get from my higher power in nature and in meditation and in whatever my higher power wants to do with me. It's like I've learned to get out of the way as much as I can.
In your biography, you wrote, I remember reading...
Yeah, I've been writing one because somebody insisted I write a book for him.
So there's a moment where you say that you came back to surfing, and there were some shadow times in your life, and you weren't surfing, and you've kept on coming back to surfing. And is that why? Is it that's the essence of your return when shadow or very challenging times come?
Why did it come back to surfing? Or
yeah, and how did that help?
How did that happen?
In that
and
healing?
What was that about? Yeah, I got so bummed at the world and people and ruining, surfing got so popular so fast, and people who didn't know anything about surfing, using surfing and using surfers to promote their what looked and felt ugly and didn't feel good to me. Didn't know what to do, so I bombed out. I was a progressive, crazier alcoholic addict, and it got too much trouble to carry a surfboard around. I'd stash one at surf spots, and sometimes people would steal them. A lot of stealing started going on in those times, Took way too much psychedelics and got off of alcohol for a while and started smoking a lot of hashish to come down off the psychedelics. And I was taking LSD before it was illegal, and that's why it was like I was asking God, what's going on? And I thought it was the LSD that made God talk to me, but actually I found out later it was actually just my sincere-hearted desire. God chose to answer me and talk to me, and after I met God, it's like things were really different. I just left it all behind. I took everything I owned. There was a guy who was reminding me the other day here, who came up to me and he said on the North Shore, Wayne Lynch came up to me on the North Shore when I had a tree house and a surfboard, and it was like when I really cast surfing off, was that point where he saw me do it. He said, where there was a big storm came up, and I needed to let go of everything, and I just threw everything I owned. All I had was a Muslim bathing suit. I had to keep that on to keep from getting thrown in jail for nude. And I took my blanket and my holy books and my surfboard, and that's all I owned, pretty much. and a hash pipe, and I threw it all in the ocean in a storm. And it all went out in the rip at Sunset Beach. And so I walked around the island and came back, and I found that I was taking a lot of psychedelics, and I found that the whole universe is comprised of electromagnetic waves of energy, and I could actually, ride those waves of energy, those cosmic waves of energy, and I was like, going off the planet, body and all, and people actually saw me do it, and like the Silver Surfer. So that comic book came out about that time, the Silver Surfer, and I was the Silver Surfer. According to them, I was just surfing all over the universe without a surfboard. I found that people didn't understand what was happening at all, and I would lose touch with people, and I'm a human being. And I discovered God made it very clear to me that I'm here on earth to be of service, and that's why He's giving me life. And so I'm here to be of service to other people in whatever way He wants me to be of service. Unless I'm acceptable to human beings, when I was walking around, when I didn't need to eat or breathe or do anything, I was just a cosmic phantom of light, rainbow flying around, and somehow still had a body on the earth. People would, when they would encounter me, it would scare them. My reality, that somebody didn't need to breathe and have a heartbeat and was just a walking drug zombie, so to speak. It was frightening to them, and their bodies, there was no communication. I couldn't do any communicating with them. I was no help. I was just a fright. And people would try to throw me in jail, accuse me of causing revolutions, the hippie revolution, federal indictments, treason. They said I committed treason against the U.S. by causing the hippie revolution. How about that for a joke? Like, sure, yeah, right. Me? No. Spontaneous combustion of consciousness, maybe. Okay? But not me. No, I was not the mastermind. There was a Father Creator voice that used to talk out loud, really loud, sometimes in front of other people, and federal agents were there one time when he talked really loud, so they thought I was the leader because people would look at me because God talked at me, And I don't know. God will talk to any of you. God talks to all of you every day. It talks to you through your children. How do I listen to God talk today? I'm getting tripped out here talking about it. It's like I returned to wave surfing because every time I would get too far, I would not go out in the ocean and let a wave push me around and hydraulically massage my body and give me this new life that it was releasing its life that it got from the sun into the wind, into the water, into the wave, into me. And when the wave is breaking, it's expiring, it's ending its life, and it's releasing that energy. And when that energy passes through my body, it rebirths me.
Time is precious. Thanks for spending some of yours listening with us today. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Jake Alexander. The soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. And you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.